back. Hey, Mr.
Here we go.
Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello, everybody. Bob Lusk coming at you live from the RV. I'm down at Running River Ranch, Washington County, Texas. I get to hang out with grandkids for the next 3 days while their parents get to go on a nice respite. Hey, Jack Miller, good to see you, my friend. Wish I could come over there and hear some of your music over there in the Carolinas and Georgia. I love it, man. You got some passion to go with your art. Look at there. There's John Funk from Michigan. He's freezing to death. Mike Cook, good to see you, buddy. Mike's up from the Carolinas with the Boy Scouts camp. Travis Smith, good to see you. James Allen. James Allen's from the Carolinas. We got quite a bit of an East Coast swing here today. I'm glad to see everybody. So I don't know how good this connection is, but we're going to give it a whirl and answer your questions and see where we can go. I thought I'd start off the topic with stewardship and what else did they tell me I was going to talk about? Stewardship and fish behavior. That's what I was told I was going to do. These girls, they come up with some really cool ideas. So I see Tori Rhodes, good to see you. So what I thought I'd talk about with stewardship is in the last few years, that's few to me is relative. I'm going to tell you the last 15 to 20 years, I am seeing, Travis, you're in Mexico today. Yeah, you're still there. You're hanging out there. There's R.E. Thompson checking in from South Mississippi. You must still be hunkered down. You're not out doing your work tonight. I'm glad to see you. Hey, Fred Bingaman from Brownstown, Illinois. Good to see you. I don't know who else we got that's kind of going fast. John Pearson. Good to see John. Glad you guys are hanging out with me tonight. We got a good audience to start. I'm thrilled to death. Now, with the cell coverage I've got and my slow internet, it's going to take a while for these things to scroll up my feed on my laptop where I can actually see it. Matter of fact, I see it spinning right now, so I don't know how good this internet connection is going to be. Hoping the cell phone connection is good enough, so we'll see. So anyway, I see Kim Moore checking in. Good to see Kim. Where I wanted to go first was talking about stewardship. The last 15, 20, even 25 years, I've seen a big swing with landowners where, you know, back in the late 80s and through the 90s, especially through there, Drew Bachman, there's another Carolina guy. That's so cool. Good to see everybody. Danny Mack, Outdoor Fajitas just now, but yeah, you got a norther coming at you there in San Antonio. Kenneth Primo from Louisiana. Holy cow, we got all kinds of folks from all over the place. It's so good to see everybody. Wish we could just shake hands and sit around a campfire and shoot the breeze. So we don't have a campfire. We don't have a breeze, but we got a little conversation to have. But where I was going is I've seen a shift from where people were buying land like in the late 80s, early 90s for a couple of reasons. One was to park money, which that still happens for folks that are well-to-do and need a place to put money other than the traditional things. They go buy land. And the second thing was to kind of satiate an appetite for the outdoors. You know, rather than wait in line at a boat ramp, you know, to launch that, back then, that $25,000 bass boat and then go find that somebody else is fishing in their hole. Why not build your own lake? But now the trend is more towards stewardship, which I deeply appreciate. I went and looked at a place today, and it had wild magnolia trees growing on it. Now, in Texas, you know, in Mississippi, Georgia, you're going to see that. But in most of Texas, you don't. And when I pulled up there, I know that the guy you could tell that he had logged some of the area because you could see the stumps, and he basically thinned his forest, which is good stewardship. Because if you thin the forest where it's too dense, then that gives more food, more water, more sunlight for the rest of the trees and the rest of the undergrowth that it can grow. And I noticed there were a bunch of just small magnolia trees. I said, tell me what that's about? He says, we don't know. He says, as far as we can tell, those are all native. Somebody probably planted them years ago, but this habitat is just perfect. And I said, well, what are you thinking about them? He says, I want to leave them alone. I want them to grow and just see what they'll do. And if they'll bloom, that's great. Well, that's stewardship. And then as we got to talking about where he wants to build a lake, one of the things I pointed out to him, I said, you know, the decisions you're making right now are very, very important for stewardship. He says, I'm all about that. Tell me about it. So I said, when that bulldozer fires up, or that traco gets going, or that scraper starts moving dirt, you're going to change that ecosystem and that environment for 5 generations past you. If you think about that, that's the truth. So it's really, really important that you think about what you're going to do and plan it out. Now, one of the reasons I told him that was we drove by what looks like it's going to end up being a cove. And I noticed there were some moist soils, plants growing there. And, of course, they're dormant this time of year. But I saw about 5 different plants in this upper reaches of a creek bed. And he said, I want to put a hatchery pond right here. And I said, no, you don't. No, you don't. He said, well, why not? I said, you see all these plants here? I said, that's a wetland, and it's nature's filter system. He said, oh, I had no idea. And I said, yeah, if you'll just leave those plants alone, as water comes down that little tributary, these plants are going to filter that water for you. But if you take it out and put a pond in it, you're going to increase erosion. Those plants won't be there to help filter the water, take up minerals and metals that otherwise would make it on down into your pond or your lake. He said, man, I love it. Let's put a hatchery pond somewhere else. So I think the main point that I want to drive home right now is let's talk about good stewardship and what you can do to be better stewards. Let me see who all we got going. Look at there. There's Bill Russell checking in, Doug Cusick, Nick Kajewski, Mike McPherson from Indiana. Good to see you guys. Bill Russell from Lower Alabama, Mike Cottrell, Palapena County, Mike Skibicki from North Georgia, and Billy Bates. Good to see all you. Josiah's got his fermented grape juice. Well, I've been on the road today, and when I got here in the RV, I've got it winterized, so there's no water on. There's antifreeze in all the P-traps, all of them. So I'm not going to turn the water on, and I didn't bring any wine over here. So right over there, about 50 yards, is my son and daughter-in-law's house, and he'll have some pretty good fermented grape juice over there after the show. So that's where I'm going to go. So stewardship takes many forms. Now, when you guys start having questions, pitch them out there. You know how we like to do this. By the way, here we are, 7 minutes in. I haven't told you. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click the little heart. Somebody told me to do that. I don't know why. I have not researched it. And share this video to your timeline, and you're going to be eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat, which I happen to bring, a Pond Boss hat, and a Pond Boss t-shirt, because Leanne has not found any more of those mugs and know how to keep hot things hot and cold things cold, but she's looking. She's looking. Troy Todd, John Cruitt, good to see you guys. You guys know what to do. Look at there, Pond Boss Magazine. Hey, I got to do my little commercial straight up. $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date, and it's going to last a year. And I promise you, every issue you get, there's going to be a nugget, some kind of nugget, $35 for a year, 6 of them, every other month, bi-monthly. So there's my commercial. We knocked that smooth out. So stewardship can be anything from how you manage your water to keep the water happy. You've heard me talk about that before. Happy water is where it all starts. Mike, I don't know when I'm coming through North Carolina again, but one of these days I will. There's Matt Marsden. I see Matt checking in. Brian Lee Baker got his magazine today. You know what's really funny is we mailed those magazines December 23rd. Yeah, that's what I said. You just got it today, Pond Boss? Russell Braswell from Birmingham, Alabama. Good to see you. Travis has still not gotten. Travis, if you haven't, I tell you what, send an email to info@pondboss.com. And I don't know if we send it to Mexico or not. I'm not sure. I see Chance Birch checking in. Good. So, anyway, stewardship. I want to go back to that. Stewardship's everything from making sure your water stays happy by not abusing it, to keeping your fish happy with the best habitat, the best environment they can have with a well-managed food chain and a well-managed harvest plan, to what goes on at the waterline. It didn't dawn on me, and Jack Miller, if you're still watching this, you're going to know what I'm talking about. You know, I think I started coming to Kingfisher like in 2005. Yeah, oh gosh, that's 16 years ago. That's when we started to develop the fishery for Kingfisher Society, Richmond Mill Lake in Laurel Hill, North Carolina. Well, they had drained that lake and spent 4 years renovating the dam. 4 years. That's how long it took to get the lake drained, which when you got 7,000 to 10,000 gallons a minute coming over down that watershed every single day of every week of every month all year, it's hard to get the lake drained. They couldn't totally drain it all the way down, but they got it low enough where they could at least manage the water and rebuild the dam. Now, the reason they decided to rebuild the dam, they tore it down and started over, primarily because they were concerned about the safety of the dam and what would happen if it ruptured downstream. They didn't want that to happen. So Jim Morgan and his family had some meetings, decided they'd renovate that dam, and it took 4 years. 4 years to do that. A lot of concrete, a lot of sand, as much clay as they could find, which isn't much clay in that part of the country. Whatever they built it in, out of, most of it, they had to truck it in. Then they rip-wrapped the front. Well, you know, the dam could be made out of sand because, like what Mike Otto's always told me, you just got to have more water coming in than what leaks out, you know, and it'll stay full. Well, they sure had that there. But what I noticed is as we started working on habitat, improving habitat in the basin of that lake and coming up with a fisheries management plan, what I didn't realize was once the lake filled back up, there were going to be some really, really cool things happen. So while we focused on habitat for fish, here's what happened. There are like the lake is shaped kind of like a salamander. So it's got legs, which are coves coming in. And what we saw were these really big sandbars. That lake was built in 1835 or finished in 1835. That's a long time ago. That was 170 years back, not that long ago. And so there were, now of course, some of the basin of the lake was really boggy, like peat moss boggy, but a lot of it wasn't. So we saw where there were spawning beds, pine trees began to grow, brush started to grow. You can imagine 4 years of a lake being from 125 acres down to 30, a lot of stuff grew up in the basin of that lake. And one of the things that grew was a moist plant, a grass that looks like Johnson grass. I never could figure out what that plant was. I didn't spend a lot of time looking for it, but I couldn't key it out on any sites that I had or any books that I had with me. But what would happen when the lake filled back up, those mats of grass would grow and extend maybe a foot above the water, and then as they did what they did with photosynthesis and respiration, the root bed would become buoyant because it would fill up with gases, and it would push the roots up, and it would make those mats float. So we had floating islands that would migrate around that lake. And so what I started seeing with those floating islands was, I happened to be out there one day in a boat just looking around trying to see what I could see as I was watching fish feed. We had a lot of feeders out there feeding fish. There's still some feeders out there to this day. But dang mosquito in here. How do you get in here? So what I noticed were little insect husks on these floating islands. So I started paying attention, and there were, I bet you, 15 different kinds of dragonflies. Well, when I first started going there, you had to go in at dusk or the mosquitoes would carry you off because some of that lake is really marshy. I mean, there's some areas that are inaccessible by walking or even by boat. Too dense with brush, too dense with marsh-type plants, but it was marshy. Well, as you can imagine, it was full of mosquitoes. Well, they had rip-wrapped the dam. They'd added some rocks in other places, and what started happening was damselflies, dragonflies, mayflies, all kinds of aquatic insects started to percolate up and hatch and grow. And a lot of those insects eat mosquitoes. And we found we could start staying out after dark, and the mosquitoes weren't that bad. There were still some mosquitoes, but not unbearably bad. And then as those insect populations grew, and some of that was due to the fact that we were feeding fish, so we were adding food to feed the fish, and the fish could feed everything else, if you know what I mean. And we started seeing plants grow that had not grown in that lake before. We saw insects begin to grow. We started seeing some transformations at the waterline with the plants growing there along the edge. We started seeing songbirds coming in to feed on those insects. The water moccasin numbers plummeted because we were growing big bass. Big bass were eating little water moccasins. So we started seeing some ecological things due to the stewardship of how we were managing that lake. And then as the songbirds began to come, we started seeing hawks folks, we saw, and for a long, long time, until like about 3 or 4 years ago, there were a pair of ospreys that would come and nest every spring. And their baby, it was really fun because right across from the cabin, from the lodge, you could see those ospreys working, catching fish and feeding their young, and watch the young fledge grow up, learn how to fly and go away, and then parents would come back every year. And then there was a pair of bald eagles show up that I promise you wouldn't have been there if they didn't have a food source. So the stewardship that with the things that you do are going to influence not just what goes on under the water, it's going to influence what goes on at the water line and then 8 or 10 feet above the water line. And when that happens, it's going to influence more of what happens up in the sky. You know, I mean, I've seen, there was a ranch I helped manage out in West Texas. We went through a really severe drought. Almost every pond dried up. You can't imagine the wildlife that came to those handful of ponds that didn't dry up. You could also imagine how the moisture in the air declined because they didn't have a source. So your ponds and the way you manage your water also influence what goes on in the sky, because where do clouds come from? They don't just show up. You know, they're water that's evaporated from somewhere, whether it's the Gulf of Mexico or the Mississippi River or your pond. So that influences the climate, even if it's just a small extent. So what you do to keep your water happy and healthy, stewardship-wise, is a big, big deal. So I want to talk about that just for a few minutes. Look at there, Christopher Aguilar is here. I'm going to get to see you next week, I think, if COVID has straightened itself out. Travis, send an email to info@pondboss.com and let Leanne know. She will send another copy out straight away. Chris Blood, how do fish react to these? We're going to talk about that. That's part of the reason that the girls picked my topic tonight is fish behavior. Let's see, Travis Paul Smith, just to let you know, not worried about the magazine, has customer service the same as Pure Texas Hunter. Holy cow, look at that. Chris, he's tooting your horn for you. Chris is with Texas Hunter. So, Chris, I'm going to hop in and talk about that. Good question. And you know what? While we got Chris on the phone here, so to speak, Chris gets on me all the time. I say, no, he doesn't get on me all the time. He says, Bob, what do you do? What kind of services do you provide? So let's go ahead and knock that out. As you guys know, I'm not comfortable talking about myself. You know what I do stands on its own merit. We do have the Institute of Higher Pondology, which the main mission of the Institute of Higher Pondology is to help landowners that want to build a lake or take an existing lake and make it better, pay less dumb tax. I mean, Debbie and I are paying dumb tax right now. We are. We paid a painter, and he showed up. When he came, he talked good. He prepared some. He painted with the right equipment. He had a truck, a ladder, and wore white pants and a white shirt and had paint on it. So he's a painter. Well, our lesson is not everybody that has a truck and a white shirt and a ladder is a painter. There's a lot more to it than what we know. So we're paying the dumb tax with our painter. So here we go. And what we try to do with the Institute of Higher Pondology is minimize that dumb tax, help you not pay quite as much dumb tax, just by helping you learn things that you don't know. The other resources you've got, of course, you got Pond Boss Magazine, you've got the Pond Boss Discussion Forum, you've got lots of these videos. Actually, I think this is my 4th year to do this. Debbie talked me into it. She started talking about it a long time ago. So, Howard Dittrich over in Florida says, did you know coots love Aquamax? I did not know coots love Aquamax, but that doesn't surprise me. Kenneth Dwagons, I just like to stop by, even if only long enough to say I appreciate you. Now, I hope you're working on a YouTube Live, and Happy New Year's. I will be working on that before long. I'm waiting on the painter so I can have a little studio that my wife is going to build. And then I'm going to start looking more at YouTube Live and some audio podcasts. Mike McPherson, any update on raffling off a Texas Hunter fish feeder? You know what? I have not talked to Chris about that. And I don't know how we raffle one off. We need to talk about that. That's a suggestion, Chris. The other thing Chris would want me to tell you is that part of the way I make my living, as a matter of fact, a significant part of the way I make my living is designing fishing lakes. I looked at that site today that I was telling you about earlier on. And so I can help people. Now, I don't design dams. That's not my deal. I stay in my lane. My lane is to represent landowners who want to build lakes and make sure that they're protected from the agenda of those people that are going to be their vendors. So in other words, to look over their shoulder, even though I don't design dams, I get it. I know what needs to be happening with dams, and I know if that person they're working with gets it. Now, you're not going to catch me doing any calculations on overflow pipes or how big the spillway needs to be or compaction of dirt. I don't do that. But what I like to do is design the interior of the lake where everything is going to be living and breathing and being stewardshiped. There's Frank James. Good to see Frank. Chance, Texas Hunter Chris, are you giving us a coupon code for the fish feed? Well, Chris doesn't, you know what? Chris doesn't have a coupon code for fish food, I don't think. But you know what? I might be able to come up with something like that. Let me talk to, you know what? I don't want to try to remember this because I'm on the road. Chance, Birch, send an email to info@pondboss.com and ask if we can get a coupon code for fish food. And I will bounce that off of Purina and see what they say. So I will do that. Okay, so now let's go back to Chris's question about fish behavior. I'm down in Washington County, Texas, between Brenham and Navasota near Washington on the Brazos, where the first capital of Texas is. It's probably not 5 miles from where I'm sitting, back when Texas was a republic rather than a state, as we should be. Take that for what it's worth. But where I'm going is I don't know where I'm going. Yeah, I know where I'm going. When I talked to the girls today, when I talked to Leanne, the cold front had already passed through North Texas. It's probably 75 degrees here now. It's probably in the 40s there. So there's a cold front coming through. That's where I'm going. Fish behavior. So when a cold front comes through and the barometric pressure begins to drop, especially when the temperatures are pretty moderate like they are now, water temperature right here is going to be in the upper 50s, lower 60s. Now in North Texas, which is 4.5 hour ride from here, so that's probably 300 miles, something like that, that water temperature is going to be in the low 50s, upper 40s. So that water temperature there is, those fish are going to behave differently than the fish here. So everything is temperature related. That's the big deal with fish. Fish behavior is temperature driven, temperature related, and it's temperature driven. So although fish need oxygen to live, you know, they need food to eat, they need to be able to navigate and breathe and reproduce and all that, but they're constantly seeking their prime temperature. Now each species of fish, they have a different preference on temperatures. A largemouth bass, for example, their operating temperature is between 58 degrees and 83 degrees, somewhere through there. Their prime operating temperature is going to be low 60s to middle to upper 70s. That's where they operate the best. They're cold-blooded. You know, bluegill, red ear sunfish, similar. Bluegill, they can stand it cooler than red ears can. So where I'm going is each fish species is behaviorally related to temperature. Now, when a cold front's coming through, like over where Howard is, over in the panhandle of Florida, when this front gets here, and like where I am right now, the temperature's getting ready to drop, the wind's getting ready to change from the southwest to the northwest, and when that happens, the barometric pressure is going to drop. And as that barometric pressure drops, the fish can sense it. They can feel it through their lateral line. So when you look at a fish, you know, and you look closely on depending on the species, you'll see a line that goes about halfway across their, you know, from the top to the bottom, all the way from the tip of the tail up to just past their gill plate. Well, that's a tube that has gas in it, and it senses changes in pressure. It can sense movement in the water. You know, that's sometimes how a bass knows that there's something going on. If a school of shad flushes 30 yards away, and that vibration that hits the bass, and that bass is conditioned, has learned over time to go investigate that, then they can go get a free meal. You know, but also what happens is that barometric pressure drops, those fish sense it, and they have this innate ability Well, I was getting a call there. I had to turn it off, so that was the pause. Sorry about that. So what happens is they can sense that, so they have an instinctive conditioned behavior thing telling them that they've got to go eat, and they can because it's going to get worse. So when that barometric pressure is shifting, especially fast, they go in a feeding frenzy. Now, all fish feed, but they don't all feed at the same time. Like when they're in their normal patterns, you can go over a school of fish while you're fishing, and there might be 40 fish in it of similar size, bass, for example, from 1.5 to 2.5 pounds, and you might catch 4 of them, bam, 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 but the other 46 aren't going to bite a hook because they're just not hungry and you didn't anger them enough. You know, fish bite a hook out of really 3 purposes. One, they're defending something like a nest or a strike zone or, you know, a place where they like to ambush from. Or they're hungry, or you just piss them off. That's the reasons that a fish will strike. So when you're fishing through a school of largemouth bass, for example, even though you can mark them on your sonar, mark them on your electronics, you can only get 4 of them to hit a hook. That's because the others aren't hungry, and you're not pissing them off, and they're not guarding anything. You know, so but what happens when the barometric pressure changes, that's a signal to all the fish that, hey, things are getting ready to change, the temperature's going to drop, you need to eat. So they go on a feeding frenzy, and they all feed for hours prior to that front passing until just after that front passes. Now, once that front passes, they're done. Every angler will tell you, you're not going to catch a fish that's hungry. It just isn't going to happen. Now, the best anglers can figure out how to pattern the fish and how to piss them off enough, even though the temperature dropped, water temperature dropped 4 or 5 degrees, you know, to make them bite a hook. But that's not all there is about. Ron didn't get to ship his fish. Ron's got some fish that's got some issues going on, and he's going to send them to a pathologist and figure out what's going on. So anyway, I'll tell you more about fish behavior in a minute. Let's see here. Frank James, good to see Frank. Justin Ludwig, been in the 30s all day here in central Oklahoma. Yeah, it's going to be colder than that tonight, won't it? Doug Cusick, single digits, close to 0 in Kansas. Yep. Tom Blasdale, we try to practice good stewardship on 200 acres here in southern Illinois, 7 acres, which is our lake. We try to improve our standing timber while maximizing deer, turkey, quail, and rabbit habitat. Invasive exotics such as autumn olive, bush honeysuckle, multiflora rose, garlic mustard, Serratia lespedeza, Phragmites, etc. are a huge problem. And the reason that some of those have some habitat benefit. You know, for example, bush honeysuckle is going to help with honeybees, which is going to help pollinate other plants that you want. So that's, you know, while it can be invasive, you can mow that down. But stuff like autumn olive, oh my gosh, that stuff's got thorns on it. It was thought to be good years and years and years ago to help keep soils in place to minimize erosion, but it's so invasive. Multiflora rose, that can be a problem because there's thorns on it. Nothing likes it for habitat. Lespedeza has very, very little nutritional benefit. Phragmites, oh my gosh, Phragmites is so domineering that it will overtake a wetland just in a few years. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. So what I hear Tom saying is that part of being a good steward is not only doing the things you can, but recognizing the things that inhibit stewardship and then figure out what you can do about it. And should you? You know, so you got to take each one of those plants and figure out, do they fit into your management strategy? Do they fit into the natural productivity or to the natural habitat? And if they don't, then you got to do what you got to do to get rid of them and replace them with something that does. You know, so some of these plants, you know, garlic mustard, what's going to eat that other than somebody that likes spaghetti sauce, you know? Garlic mustard, that's a pretty tough one. Where I see garlic mustard is in poor soils. So soils like that would be a great place for legumes if you can access it and you can plant them with no-till. So, no, I hear what you're saying. Ooh, there's that mosquito. I think I got it that time. I don't know how a mosquito can be in here. This place has been locked up and uninhabited. All right, throw me some more questions. It's 6:59. I do want to take a minute and pause and thank Purina Mills. I'll be there in April shooting some more vignettes for living the country life vignettes that they do. I see Jay Hafner, good to see him. Katie Cooner, hi Katie, good to see Katie Cooner. Purina Mills, I've told you guys this over and over and over, but one of my favorite things about them is how they do research and development. They're continually researching to see what they can do to make their feeds better. Matter of fact, they're getting ready to commission a study to make sure that they've got the right vitamin package. Is there a way to improve protein digestibility and 4 or 5 other things? And it's so cool for them to be doing stuff like that. Hey, Drew. Hey, Ron and Mike. Good company hanging out with you. Dude, I need to talk to you. You guys listen to this. Talking about stewardship. I met a guy today and looked at this property. I was talking about it earlier in the show, Drew. You can go back and look at it later. But this guy's got like 1,500 acres that he's accumulated over the last 10 years. Now, what he's done something really, really cool. It's going to change the way that we all do business, especially guys like Drew. Hey, so listen up, Drew. This guy has invented a drone and patented it, done the R&D on it. And this drone has, I think it's called LiDAR capabilities with proprietary software and some kind of sense thing on it where they can fly it like at 150 feet and come within 6 millimeters of the actual contour of the land through dense forest and brush. So where it is now, we got to go in and hack our way into a forest to get a line of sight to a satellite to work it out with GPS. He's cracked the nut on, and he showed me some of his 1-foot contour maps today that are just stunningly accurate on land that is fully forested. So it's not cheap, but neither is going in and surveying a piece of property that you want to put a lake on. You know, when we're surveying a site to build a lake, we got to figure out where to put the dam, and then we got to come back in and figure out where the water line is going to be, because most people don't want to take trees out of a lake that aren't going to be wet. You know, they want to preserve those trees. That's part of the stewardship thing. So this tool is going to be pretty dadgum cool and helpful. So thanks to Purina Mills for your research and development. And I'd love to brag on them more about their customer service, but there's some dealers that, and you know, they've got a good distribution system and they've got a great product, and I endorse them highly. Texas Hunter, same thing. I love Texas Hunter. They've got some cool new things coming that it's just, you know, from the hunting and fishing side and the fish feeding side, the whole bit. They've got all kinds of stewardship stuff that they sell, and their customer service is bar none, nobody better than they are. Texas Hunter is outstanding. Easy Docks of Texas. I haven't seen David tonight, but David he's really got his heart and his actions in the right place on stewardship as well. Okay, let's see here. There's Steve Thorburn checking in. Good to see Steve from Kansas. Yeah, you better add another log on the fire and another layer on top of you to get warm. Frank James, Bob, to what extent are largemouth bass sensitive to sunlight in summer versus winter? Do they prefer dim light to bright? They actually adjust. They adjust to the light. Now, what's really, really interesting, largemouth bass, they like bright light, but they like to be hidden so they can't be seen, but they love to see the light because they're sight feeders. So in clear water, they're pretty dadgum prolific at being able to chase and catch their food. The darker the water or the more turbid the water, then they have to use their sight as a last resort and their lateral line to detect movement as their primary source to chase down bait. But what happens is not all of them are good at that. So the ones that can adapt and condition to that watercolor at that moment are the ones that do really, really well. Like here's something that happened. Lake Austin in Austin, Texas, public lake. It's a river lake. Was choked with hydrilla years ago. And so this was probably 2000, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, something like that. And that was at the beginning of a drought. So the Parks and Wildlife Department stocked triploid grass carp, anticipating two things. One was that it would take them months to eat some of the hydrilla enough to get the volume of it down. And secondly, quite a few fish would escape down the Colorado River because it's a flowing lake. Well, it didn't rain and it didn't flow, and they didn't release a lot of water from that whole chain of lakes. And the grass carp came in and ate all the hydrilla. Well, that put the anglers up in arms. And what happened is that water went from, well, there's another call. There's another call. I'll have to return it later. And so what happened was they just eradicated that hydrilla. Now, hydrilla, one of its natures is to soak up all the nutrients from the water column as well as the mud. But when it went away and the grass carp ate it, digested it, and excreted it, the water turned green. So those fish that were used to water clarity didn't have water clarity. And when the water clarity dissipated and disappeared and got dense, the fish had to change the way they ate. They had to become more nomadic. So they started moving around and anglers couldn't find them. They didn't leave. They just reconditioned the ones that could and adapted to that environment. That's a behavioral thing. Okay, here. Okay, so, all right, I can see people adding comments, but I can also see that the cell service that I've got is not allowing this to really roll like it normally does. Okay, let's see. Chad Roberts, this spring will be year 3 for my 1 acre pond in Ohio. I plan on taking 10 to 15 pounds of 12 to 14 inch underperforming largemouth. Does it matter whether I do that over the whole year or a couple trips? 1 acre pond in Ohio, year 3. I tell you what, Chad, be sure that your bass have reproduced and there's young fish coming up the pipe. If you don't have some 6 to 8 inch and 8 to 10 inch fish coming up the pipe, then I wouldn't harvest that many. Now, to answer the question, should you do it all at once or over time? When you catch those fish, if they're fat and chunky, throw them back. They're learning how to play the game. You need to be weighing and measuring some of those fish and looking at their relative weights. If you're catching some that are underweight, that's the ones that you need to harvest. Now, be objective about that. You know, if you start fishing those right at ice out, you know the females are going to be fat, full of eggs. Preserve those. The males are going to be more lean and thinner. Take some of those out. You know, if you're going to do some of it in the summertime, I'd say spread it out over the course of a year. 10 to 15 pounds, that might only be 20 fish. Spread that out over a few months, and then make sure you got other fish coming up the food chain. Now, that's the answer for Ohio, because Ohio isn't famous for growing largemouth bass. I'm going to tell you something totally different, Howard Dittrick, because you're in Florida. You know, it's okay for you to be culling fish because your fish are going to replace themselves a lot more quickly because you've got more bass growing days, more bluegill growing days, more shiner growing days. All right, let's see. Danny Mack, LIDAR is how all sorts of prehistoric structures. There you go. It's pretty. I'm learning more about it. I don't know much about it. I'm learning. Steve Thorburn, stove is rolling with hedge. Cow's got an extra bale tonight. There you go. Dave Weber's having a hard time. Katie Cooner was going to put something up. Disappeared. Somebody says refresh it. Tom Blasdell headed to the north woods of Wisconsin. The end of January ice fishing. Probably will be 24 inches of ice. Hopefully we can get above 0 temperatures. Targeting bluegill and crappie plus anything else that will bite. You know, I live in Texas. I can't offer anything to that other than go have fun and stay inside something on that ice to be warm. But you knew that. None of us down here do. Okay, J.B. Clayton, how do the forage fish react to a winter cold front? They do the same thing. They know that they're going to need to go forage. They're going to need to go eat. You know, they're not going to be as aggressive as the predator fish are, but they're going to go graze and feed like golden shiners. They're going to go pluck stuff off of dormant plants or plants that are going dormant. Bluegill are going to be trying to pick out as much as they can bug-wise, you know, and whatever they can find. There's not going to be many small fish, but they're going to feed too. Because part of the goal of a fish is to make it through the winter. So their behavior prior to these fronts are a piece of that puzzle. So they want to make sure that their bodies are in good enough shape going into the winter that they don't die. Because there's going to come a time when they don't feed very well. Like going up in the northern part of the country with 24 inches of ice, those fish don't have a lot to eat down there. So when they catch those crappie and bluegill through 2 feet of ice and bring them up, those fish are primarily surviving on their own flesh. So if they built up some stores of body fat over the winter, like right now, as we're going into the winter, then they're going to not consume or not metabolize as much flesh as it would if they didn't have enough to eat in the fall and prior to these cold fronts. So these fronts trigger that behavior, trigger that feeding frenzy, because nature tells them that it ain't going to get better, it's going to get worse. And by the time we get into the middle of the winter, most of the food chain that's been produced, if you were good stewards of your water, good stewards of your habitat, good stewards of your harvest plan, you manage your plants right, then you've grown a great food chain that was able to feed those fish all fall long, coming into the winter with these fronts as they decimate the food chain so they can make it those few months through winter, and then be able to come out on the backside of winter healthy enough that they can reproduce adequately and get back into the game and start to grow more. So I don't know how to explain it any better than that. That really pretty well sums it up right there. So forage fish are doing a frenzy as well as they're being eaten. Okay, R.E. Thompson, can you plant, where'd it go? Can you plant hydrilla in a 5-acre pond? If so, how? Mr. Thompson, if you plant hydrilla in any body of water that I have anything to do with, you're fired. I don't like hydrilla. I don't like it at all. It's too invasive. It dominates. It's not hard to kill. But here's the thing about hydrilla. Anglers love it because it's good edge cover. But like in a public lake, like Amistad, Falcon, those lakes in Texas down on the border, those things rise and fall 50 feet through the course of a year based on runoff and how much they're irrigated from. Well, hydrilla there is okay because the water fluctuates levels. But in a 5-acre pond in southern Mississippi where you don't have much winter, if you get hydrilla started in it in 3 or 4 places, by year 4, it's 100% covering that entire pond, and now you're having to deal with it. And it reproduces 3 ways. It reproduces with tubers, by fragmentation, and seeds. So it is so prolific, it can grow, even on a day like today in South Mississippi, it might grow 2 or 3 inches a day, each strand of it. In the summertime, it'll grow 6 inches a day. That's a foot every 2 days. And it continues to spread. Don't use hydrilla for any reason ever. It's way too invasive. Way too invasive. It's an exotic plant. Just don't do it. All right. Chris Blood, Bob, tell us tell us how lake owners, let's see here, where'd it go, can hire you to do a management plan. It's really interesting. I'm working on somewhere to the tune of 20 different projects right now that are lake design plans that are like the guy today. He's in the middle of his planning stage with some action with clearing timber out of what's going to be the basin of the lake. Then the guy that referred him to me, he's just waiting on a little bit of rain to put some water in his lake enough where he can stock it with fish. So the best way to, and the first guy found me watching these videos on YouTube, because after we do these videos, Leanne uploads them to YouTube. So I'm happy to help. If I can't help you directly with a management plan, then with our resource guide at pondboss.com, we can refer you to somebody that can help you, whether it's whether you're wanting to manage a bass pond or a crappie lake or whatever it is. We've got enough resources out there that we can help you find somebody that's very willing to help. info@pondboss.com. Send an email, and that'll get the ball started. Get it moving. Okay. Jared Moyer, South Texas Catfish Bluegill Pond. First year, should I keep the fish feeder going all winter? In South Texas, Jared, I would feed the fish till they quit eating. And then I wouldn't stop feeding, I would tone it down. So one thing I've learned, especially if you want to grow really, really big bluegills, is the catfish are going to quit feeding when the water temperature hits about 55, 54, 56 through there somewhere. The bluegill will continue feeding into the low 50s, upper 40s. And a handful of the food hogs, bluegill, they'll feed all the way till the water temperature gets down into the low 40s. So I would feed them until they're not active, and then I would cut the timer back and feed them a third or 20% of what you had been feeding them, and let them do that. Let's see there. Danny Mack wants to, you know what? You really, if you're going to go fishing, right now is the time, dude. You can catch every fish in your pond there in San Antonio. Haven't seen your pond, but I've seen enough of it. I know you can go catch some fish right now. J.P. Clayton, how about the planktons? I've read it's more open water in warmer months and basically ends up on the shoreline or bottom in the winter. That's accurate. Yes, it is. And the reason it ends up on the bottom is because it dies. So what happens is plankton consumes nutrients that are dissolved into the water column. And then some plankton eats the other plankton. So there's plant plankton and there's animal plankton. And they're all pretty much centered around how much food's available in the water column. So that goes back to the stewardship side of happy water. If you've got happy water, you're going to create enough food to nurture the plankton and grow. And what feeds on the plankton are things like threadfin shad or dragonfly nymphs or damselfly nymphs or golden shiner babies. Newly hatched bass are plankton feeders. So you're able to take those nutrients, convert them to plankton, which converts them to small insects, which feeds small fish, which feeds bigger fish, bigger insects, on up the food chain. But what happens in the wintertime, remember early on in this conversation, I said it's all temperature related. The same thing happens with plankton. Different species of plankton require different temperatures windows. And so what happens is when that window closes, those plankton are done. Or if they run out of food, they're done. And when they die, then they sink to the bottom. They hit the bottom soils where bacteria begin to consume them, break them down, compost them, and then oftentimes some of those nutrients are released back into the water. And when you've got an aeration system going, you're going to push those nutrients back up into the water anyway by having vertical currents. That's why part of aeration, that's why aeration is part of stewardship of water to make happy water. The more the water moves, the more the nutrients move, the more they can be utilized by healthy types of plankton, which helps add to the food chain and helps a lot of that nutrient load that's coming into the pond or that you're adding to the pond get converted ultimately into some kind of flesh. So, I like that answer. That's good. So, let's see. Ron Ardoin, what do you want to eat next week? Drew says he's going to come down. Yeah, you probably ought to escape that frigid Pennsylvania weather. What do we want to eat next week? You know what? I'm in your territory, dude. I mean, I eat what you eat. I drink what you drink. It's just my wife tells me I need to tone down on the carbs and ramp up on protein and green vegetables because if I don't lose weight, I will die, which she's probably right. I'm going to die anyway. Might as well not be from eating. Okay, Harrison Davis, good evening. Josiah, I found a dog food that is grain-free, made up of salmon, bone meal, and some other ingredients. I know you're a Purina Mills Aquamax guy, but would this not work as fish food? I had used cat food in the past, and the fish loved it. Yeah, just go ahead and feed your dog some Aquamax. So I'm being a little bit of a smarty pants, as my wife would say, because just because dog food is grain-free, it's designed for the nutrition systems or the digestive systems of a dog. Fish are different. Fish have a different vitamin needs. They have different mineral needs. That's one of my favorite things about Purina is they've taken the time and the research that they funded to figure that out. Some of that research they've done there at the farm. Some of it they've done with independent researchers empirically to figure that out. So although your fish might eat dog food, well, I eat donuts. And when I eat donuts, I don't feel so good. I mean, used to I could eat donuts and it's great. But now, if I eat a donut, my stomach spanks me. It doesn't like it, But if you got it, you want to feed it, feed it. It may have all the protein requirements, but if it doesn't have the vitamin package it needs, it's going to cause problems with the fish's liver. And there's your bottom line. Without the right kind of digestibility, the right types of protein, if it doesn't replicate a bluegill or a trout or a bait fish that a bass would eat, or a bluegill would eat, then it's missing something. So even though it sounds great, and it is, it won't have everything that those fish need. Okay. We're talking football now. Georgia. Let's see here. Holy cow, I'm losing track. Mark Durham, good to see you, buddy. James Allen, got some whalers in Kentucky. I need to get to Kentucky one of these days. Great information. Oh, JP's, Patrick's going to be back in Pecan on Friday. Let's see, Friday. That's, you know what, I'm babysitting kids Friday. But I don't know where I'm going to be the next Friday. I got to go to Colorado and do something there. And I've got to babysit grandkids like February something. I don't remember. But yeah, let's go. I'm in. Let's see. Chris Arthur, when's the best time to add ag lime? Uh-oh, I lost it. Bear with me, I'm going to scroll back up here. When's the best time to add ag lime to a retention pond in southwest Louisiana? Anytime between now and the end of March. And add as much as you want to. You know what most people recommend is a ton per acre. I'm going to recommend at least a ton per acre. And if you can do more, do more. Because what's going to happen is with ag lime, now be sure we're talking about ag lime, dolomitic lime, calcium carbonate lime, lime like they put on hay fields and pastures. That lime, you can't overdo it because the water's only going to absorb as much as it needs. You know, if you do something like hydrated lime or quick lime or something like that, it's going to soak it all up and cause all kinds of issues. Latham, howdy. Good to see you, buddy. All right, so let me make sure I haven't missed anything here. Crawfish is carb-free. Yes, it is. I'm all in for that, but I don't believe they're in season. We'd have to buy frozen ones. Okay, so scrolling down here a little bit. Mark Durham, any experience with ice fishing? I've got a little bit. You know, most of the ice I have is in my tea, but I did spend 2 years developing a fishing program upstate New York, and I learned a lot about ice fishing. And I was a little bit more focused on how do I make that lake happy, keep the water happy so they have a minimum risk of winter kill with maximum production of fish. So it was a delicate balancing act, which part of that meant managing aquatic plants and making sure they didn't get out of hand. And New York is one of those states that borders the Great Lakes, so it's heavily restricted with herbicides and things. So we had to really pay close attention to that. And so what I did figure out is that there are ways that we could chum the fish in the late summer, early fall, and have the right kind of habitat in the best areas of the lake where those guys thought they would catch the most fish in the winter. So what we would actually do is we had some hatchery ponds there, and we would take fathead minnows and release them through a 4-inch PVC pipe into water about 10 or 12 feet deep next to brush that we had stacked up, and then mark that place with a buoy to where we can come back in when it ices up and drill in and fish there. And our experiment showed that chumming with fathead minnows about twice a week all through the fall, even after ice up, worked pretty good. The problem was you couldn't always get them to go down the pipe. We had to pour a whole lot of water in that pipe to get those minnows to go all the way down to the bottom. So, yep, and there's Howard Dittrich. Dolomite is the right kind of ag lime. Yes, that is. Let's see here. All right, Tommy Garrett. Hey, Bob, spotted a beaver a couple of days ago. Seen him a time or two since then. Should I be overly worried? I would be overly worried if you like your trees. I'll tell you what I've seen. I've seen a lot of stuff with beavers happen. And I've even seen a young beaver girdle oak trees and kill them. You know, so if there's trees you want to protect, put some chicken wire around them up 30 inches or so, because some beavers can stand up 30 inches. They won't chew through chicken wire. You know, but in terms of now the other thing I'd worry about is you don't really want them building a lodge right there in your pond. Chico and I are going to go video some ponds here in a few days up in Oklahoma. One of them we're going to look at had a giant beaver lodge in it. I shot some video footage of it. And those guys had just bought the place. It had been fairly fallow for probably 15 years where nobody had messed with it, and there was a giant beaver lodge. They brought a trapper in. He caught 4 beavers in 3 days in 4 different traps. But there were so many slides along the face of that dam, and it was completely covered in trees. So they've gone in. Most of the trees were 4 inches and smaller because they were so dense. The bottom line was they went in and they dug out that beaver lodge with a track hoe after they ground down the top of the dam so they could get to it. That beaver lodge went 5 feet back into the dam. So they dug it out, piled the wood up into the spillway, which was adjacent, and figured out they had a weak spot in the dam. So there, the beavers had weakened the dam, and they didn't really know how bad it was till they got the beaver lodge out, and that beaver lodge had been there for a long, long time. Harrison Davis, staying on that course right there, buddy. All right, let's see here, and if there's one, there's more. And that's pretty typically right. If there's a lodge, there's more, because what happens is there's a mommy and a daddy, then they have babies. And then the babies grow up, and the male gets kicked out. The girls might stay around longer, but then they continue to reproduce, and the others got to go find a place they can build a lodge and make a living where they are. So when there's a lodge, there's never just one beaver. There's at least a male and a female, and depending on the time of the year, there's offspring, which if it's been there more than 5 or 6 years, there's going to be 4 or 5 beavers living in that lodge. You know, they come and go. Now, you know, used to, way back in my day, when I was really interested in trapping things and learning about it, I had a couple of customers that said, hey, man, I got beavers, and they're eating my fish. I cannot catch a fish. Well, I didn't want to believe them, and I didn't know if it was true or not. I didn't know if beavers ate fish or not. So I bought some, went to a trapper supply store in Arkansas somewhere, and I bought, I think it was 5 conibear traps, learned how to set them, conibear 330s, and got with a trapper who taught me how to play the game and how to set the traps. And I think I caught 4 beavers from that one lake in about 10 days. And I didn't like to waste anything. I didn't want to eat beaver meat. Wasn't too sure about that. But I did take the hides. And being a biologist kind of thinker, I wanted to see what they ate. And I cut their stomachs open. Every one of them, their stomachs were packed. Guess what they were packed with? Sawdust. Every one of them. You know, they've got symbiotic bacteria that help break down that cambium layer of the tree. So they'll chew through the bark and spit out some of that, but then they'll swallow a bunch of it, and that's where they get their nutrition. So Troy Todd says beavers taste like roast beef. I will take your word for it. And if I ever trap another one, just out of curiosity, I might eat it. Let's see. Mark Durham, I put a bubbler under my dock to prevent the ice damage. It's left me with a large open water area. Think any fish may. Uh-oh, I got to wait till that scrolls down and see. Travis has been fighting beavers. Okay, so what's going on? I can see the question on the phone, but I can't see the whole question on the phone. Let me look at that. Are there any fish hanging there? Probably not. Mark, I tell you, when you put a bubbler under the dock, that water temperature, remember what we said earlier. Temperature is a big deal. So under your dock, the water temperature is probably 32.1 degrees. It's just cold enough that it's not going to freeze. Whereas out in the middle of the pond, under the ice, you're going to have 40-degree water, 39-degree water out there. And that's where those fish are going to rather be. They'd rather have that 7-degree warmth than that almost frozen temperature. So I can't imagine fish congregating around the bubbler this time of year. So that's what I think about that. Travis has been fighting them for 4 years. They're burrowing through your leg. Yep, that's kind of the way they do. So, hey, guys, I'm going to start wrapping up and go see what the grandkids are doing over here. There might be a glass of wine waiting, which if there's not, I know where it is. So, hey, Pond Boss Magazine. If you haven't subscribed to Pond Boss yet, please do that. $35 a year. It helps fuel the economy and keeps this whole economy thing going. And it's worth it. It's worth what you get from it. You know, I'm not just going to sit here and try to hawk a magazine. I'm going to try to sell you 42 years worth of my knowledge and the combined knowledge of all the writers that write in Pond Boss. I mean, we got Mark Cornwell from upstate New York. We got Dave Beasley from Virginia. You know, we got Eric West from Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. You know, we've got there's me, and I've got an article this issue coming up in March, April from one of the Pond Boss subscribers that wants to tell about his pond in Ohio and what he went through to get it. So it's pretty dadgum cool. So listen, hey, I do appreciate you guys watching this show. And next Wednesday, tune in again. Going to be hanging out outside of Lake Charles, Louisiana, eating whatever Ron says we're going to eat. And looks like I'm going to get to hang out with some of the South Louisiana guys. And if Drew Hayes shows up from Pennsylvania, we'll show him a good time too. And I know Ron well enough to know that he's going to treat us so many ways. We're bound to like one of them for sure. So, hey, Pond Boss, we love you. Appreciate you coming and watching this show. And keep it going until next Wednesday from Lake Charles, Louisiana. Adios. If I can turn it off, there's got to be a way.